Hey everyone! So recently there has been some drama within the leftist community online, and I wanted to talk about it. Now, I don't normally do drama videos. I usually leave that to the people who do this kind of stuff in their thumbnails, but I wanted to touch on this subject, not so much because it's a relevant topic right now, but because I think there's a lot we can learn from what's going on here. So I'm going to take as academic an approach as I can with this, and hopefully we can arrive at some valuable insight without getting catty. Now, if you don't know, ContraPoints is a very prominent figure here on left YouTube. She's credited with the de-radicalization of many right-wingers and the radicalization of many left-wingers through her popular video essay format. I myself have been a fan of hers for many years, and her influence on my channel, I think, is undeniable. So I don't approach this topic with any personal grudge. I love her content. However, recently she's been involved in, some would say, a ceaseless cycle of torment due to a clash between her and the broader left's view on the issue of Israel-Palestine. I mean, you guys know how it goes. The left accuses her of ignoring the issue, then she accuses them of ignoring anti-Semitism, and then the left accuses her back of repeating Zionist talking points, and then she distances herself from progressivism in a series of, I think, semi-ironic tweets, which obviously just leads to more antagonism and infighting that repeatedly compounds on itself until the entire left political space is embroiled in a maelstrom of controversy, anger, confusion, and despair. Please God, make it stop. This happens like every 3 months. All of which resulted in this Reddit post by ContraPoints, aka Natalie herself. Now, obviously, this post fixed everything, as long panicked essay posts tend to do, and nobody was mad afterwards. I'm just kidding. They got mad. They got more mad after that. So today I wanted to take a look at this post to see how we got to this point, why it made so many people upset, and what it represents broadly. There's not going to be any fancy editing in this video. There's not going to be no music, no intro. We're just going to read it, break it down, and analyze it. So here it goes. The post opens. So, many leftists feel betrayed because I haven't made a video on Palestine. Do they actually want a ContraPoints video about Palestine? Will they be happy if I get in the bath and pour milk on a mannequin of Benjamin Netanyahu? No. I've posted about Gaza occasionally and have quietly given money to Palestinian aid organizations. But I think what leftists really want is for me to join their chorus of anger. They sense some hesitation on my part and are judging me very harshly on my presumed opinion. So in the interest of keeping this video constructive and free of vitriol, I want to preface it by giving credit where credit is due and making clear what I do and do not intend to criticize. First off, I am glad that Natalie has posted about Gaza, and I think it's great that she has donated some money to the Palestinian cause. Full stop. No qualifying clause to that sentence. I just think those are good things. I've seen a lot of people online criticizing Natalie for not having spoken up soon enough, or loud enough, or frequently enough, and in that respect, I think I differ from a lot of people on the subject in that I don't think that just because someone has a large platform that necessarily means that they must use that platform to its fullest extent to condemn the genocide in Gaza. I just don't think that because something bad is happening that a ContraPoints video on the subject is therefore morally mandatory. That being said, I do find Natalie's portrayal of the left's frustration with her, as well as her implication that people really just want a chorus of anger, to be kind of a disingenuous straw man of the criticisms at hand. I don't think that the plurality of people criticizing her are demanding a 3-hour-long video essay on why genocide is bad, nor do I think that that would be even necessarily helpful. What people are upset about, I think, is a lack of clarity on what her position actually is. I think it's reasonable to assume, given her content, that Natalie would be largely aligned with the vast majority of pro-Palestinian activists, that they could expect to see their politics reflected in hers, as they have on every other issue up until this point. But instead, they see her arguing with those people on Twitter, vaguely implying a leaving the left arc, and being generally quiet on issues that are kind of hard to be quiet about. And I don't know, I guess I just don't think that it's unreasonable to be confused or even frustrated by that. I'd rather be judged on my actual opinions, so here they are. Is Israel committing a genocide in Gaza? Yes. Do I oppose it? Yes. Do I feel angry about it? Yes. I also feel a lot of other things. 1. Doom. The week after October 7th, it was clear that the mood among Israeli leaders and civilians was overwhelmingly kill-or-be-killed existential panic and unstoppable lust for revenge. It reminded me of the US after 9/11. There was no reasoning or protesting them out of it, nor was it politically feasible for the US to withdraw aid to Israel on a timeline that would make a difference. It would have required replacing most of Congress and overturning decades of bipartisan strategy and diplomacy. Even in the best-case scenario, it would have taken years. So there was a sense of futility. So I think this is an argument that you see from a lot of liberals, right? The argument that resistance to injustice is futile because real change would require an upheaval of the current political establishment. Like she said, it would take years, even in the best case scenario. And first off, I don't think that this is necessarily true. What Israel is doing is extremely unpopular almost everywhere outside of Israel and the United States. And even in those two countries, we have seen a massive shift in popular support towards Palestine and away from Israel. Billions of dollars are spent by the United States and Israel on propaganda because they know if it weren't for that propaganda that they would unquestionably lose popular support. So I always try and push back on this notion that the geopolitical establishment is this immovable force that can withstand anything thrown at it, because it's simply not the case. Systems can be changed. People can be moved. Sure, it's hard and frankly improbable, but not impossible, and certainly not futile. But let me be very clear, even if it were, even if the military-industrial complex working in tandem with the political establishment together constructed a system that was magically impermeable and permanently fixed in place, an institution divinely abjured by God himself against all efforts to change it, I still don't think that going online and lamenting about the futility of the progressive cause does anybody any favors, and certainly not the Palestinians. But worse, too, misery. The leftist pro-Palestinian movement quickly decided that their primary goal was not merely opposition to the genocide, but opposition to Zionism in general, that is, opposition to the existence of Israel as a Jewish state. And here they decided to draw the line separating decent people from genocidal fascists, which had the following consequences. 1, it shrunk the coalition. Zionist is a very broad category. Most Jews are Zionists. Anyone who supports a two-state solution is a Zionist. All right, now we're really getting into it. So here, Natalie engages in rhetoric that I personally find to be both intellectually lazy and, frankly, quite dangerous, which is that she separates what is happening in Gaza from the ideology of Zionism. She says that the leftist pro-Palestinian movement shrunk their coalition, that they made Zionism their enemy instead of simply the act of genocide. She paints an image of a hypothetical left that opposes genocide but not Zionism, one that denounces war crimes but not their root causes. I mean, listen to this sentence again. The leftist pro-Palestinian movement quickly decided that their primary goal was not merely opposition to the genocide, but opposition to Zionism in general. Are we not to take this as an implicit suggestion that opposing genocide but not Zionism generally is not only possible, but somehow more politically effective, more moral, decent even? No, the truth is that the genocide in Gaza is occurring not alongside Zionism or with the help of Zionism, but because of Zionism. Zionism is the ideological foundation for the occupation and mass slaughtering of Palestinians and is inherently inseparable from the atrocities we are all witnessing in Gaza. Zionism is the ideological end and the occupation its means. It's the reason why communities go without food for weeks and are forced to eat dirt. It's the reason that parents are forced to piece what's left of their children together. And to frame this as if a condemnation of Zionism is morally optional or even morally wrong rather than a moral obligation is the exact rhetoric that allows real genocidal Zionists to get away with their crimes. Like, imagine this argument in any other historical context. If I were in 1940s Germany admonishing the left, like, whoa guys, let's not shrink the coalition here, okay? We can condemn the concentration camps without condemning white supremacist ideology, okay? Don't you guys know that most Germans are white supremacists? I would be called a fucking Nazi apologist. Likewise, by painting anti-Zionism as some sort of irrational political mistake by the left, by framing Zionism as if it isn't the very precursor to the genocidal policy you claim to despise, you are, even if unintentionally, deflecting deserved criticism away from an ethno-religious supremacist ideology. By separating Zionism from genocide, by separating an ideology from the devastation it causes, you are holding undue water for that ideology and giving its supporters room to feel righteous in their actions. In reality, a criticism of this genocide is incomplete without a full-throated condemnation and denouncement of Zionism. Israel is undeniably an ethno-state, or at least an attempt thereof, and if you lack the ability to criticize the pursuit of that ideological end, then any criticism that you could make of its means will ultimately ring hollow. 2, it was politically infeasible. What is the pathway that takes us from the present situation to the dissolution of Israel as a Jewish state? I don't see how this could happen without either a total internal collapse of Israeli society or else, nuclear war. As usual, leftists have championed a doomed cause. So this, for me, is where the post goes from questionable and kind of apologist to actively antagonistic, and I'll say it, kind of really bad. First off, notice the way that she frames the liberation of Palestine as directly antithetical to the stability and even the existence of, quote, Israeli society. I simply reject this premise. I, for one, think that we as progressives should always hold firm in the conviction that a more egalitarian world is possible without total collapse of society, no matter how committed to ethnic cleansing one side seems to be. But even if this premise were true, even if I grant you that Palestinian liberation must necessarily mean the collapse of Israeli society, which very well could be the case, is the implication here that an occupation of a subjugated people must continue because ending it would hurt the people doing the occupation? I mean, I'm sorry if this sounds callous, but I'm pretty sure that you lose the ability to argue from a human rights standpoint when you are defending the literal state of Israel. And then there's this line. As usual, leftists have championed a doomed cause. I can think of no other way to interpret this other than you shouldn't advocate for anything unpopular because it's not likely to happen. Rhetoric similar to this line has been a tactic that actual enemies of progress have employed for literal centuries. Women's suffrage? That'll never happen. Don't waste your time. Civil rights? That's a doomed cause. And in fact, you're actually hurting the advancement of Black Americans by being so extreme. You're shrinking your coalition. You are risking sacrificing the vote of the white moderate. Never mind the fact that literally every single civil liberty that we enjoy today was fought for tooth and nail by people who were told they were being too ideological and not pragmatic enough, that they were hurting their own cause simply for not watering it down, for not preemptively ceding ground to their enemies. And that's another thing. If a 20-month-long live-streamed genocide made up mostly of children isn't enough for you, if that doesn't cross your threshold of when radical action might be justified and necessary, what does? You are a trans woman, Natalie. I don't know if you've been following the news, but The future of trans rights looks worse every passing day, it seems, in this country, but does that make the cause any less worth fighting for? No, because the civil rights of trans people isn't something that a more privileged group can use as a bargaining chip and cash in when they're afraid. It's something that must be defended always, no matter what, because sacrificing it simply isn't an option for some people. 3. It introduced dangerous ambiguities. The vagueness of Zionism as a political Satan enables all kinds of rhetorical abuses. On the one hand, right-wing Israelis hold up all anti-Zionist protests as existentially threatening and inherently anti-Semitic. On the other hand, there's a long history of anti-Semites using the term Zionist in deliberately equivocal ways. Anti-Semites are happy for the opportunity to misappropriate the now popular anti-Zionist label to legitimize their agenda, and many people are not informed enough about anti-Semitism to recognize when this is happening. These problems are mutually reinforcing. This is a false equivocation. So in this part, Natalie attempts to draw a comparison between two groups. Zionists, who deliberately conflate anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism to suit their own agenda, and anti-Zionists, whose movement is sometimes co-opted by real anti-Semites looking to suit their agenda. She poses this comparison to illustrate how both groups contribute to the vagueness and ambiguity of the term Zionist, which is then exploited for a variety of nefarious purposes. The problem here is that while yes, Zionists do deliberately conflate anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism for their own ends, therefore contributing to the ambiguity of the term itself, anti-Zionists do not. They do not share in this dangerous conflation. When anti-Semites co-opt the pro-Palestinian movement and use the term Zionists as a thinly veiled replacement for Jews, it isn't the fault of the people that they're stealing that language from. In fact, when this happens, when key terminology is stolen from the anti-Zionist pro-Palestinian movement to suit Nazis, that very dynamic is constructed by and to the benefit of Zionists. They are the ones who create that ambiguity, which they then weaponize against whoever they choose. They are the ones who make deliberate conflations, and they are the ones who hope the Nazis use that terminology because it makes anti-Zionists look guilty by association. Are we truly to be held responsible for every bad faith right-winger who steals our language for their own purposes? Well, of course not. Because if advocacy becomes wrong simply because of who ends up co-opting that advocacy, then criticism of Israel can never be justified, because there will always be anti-Semites who disingenuinely cling to the optics of pro-Palestinian liberation. And what gets me about this is that Natalie is intelligent enough to know that it's not the terminology itself that causes the wrong people to latch onto the pro-Palestinian movement. Terms aren't magic. The word Zionism isn't a spell that suddenly makes Nazis appear. In reality, it doesn't matter what the term is. It will always be co-opted because of who the movement is focused on. And I think she knows that. 3. Dread. The online left has spent the last 20 months distributing hundreds of photos and videos of dead Palestinian children. The main effect of this has been to create a population of people in a constant state of blood-boiling rage with no consequential political outlet. I fear this may be worse than useless. Anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are conceptually not the same, and conflating them is dangerous, but in practice, the way Israel is perceived does seep out into attitudes towards Jews in general. I don't think that Jews who feel isolated and wary in the current atmosphere are simply hysterical or hallucinating. Yes, there's communal trauma and hypervigilance. Yes, there's disingenuous right-wing ghouls dismissing and censoring all criticism of Israel on the pretext of fighting anti-Semitism. But there's also a valid fear of historical anti-Semitic patterns recurring, and that fear gives power to the right-wing Zionist claim that only Israel can keep Jews safe. Okay, so this is where this post gets a bit confusing for me, because If your main problem with the discourse surrounding Israel-Palestine is the dangerous conflation of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, which I agree is dangerous and bad, then why is your time and energy spent criticizing the left, criticizing pro-Palestinian advocates? Because the way I see it, they're not the ones doing that conflation. In fact, it's basically the expressed policy of Zionists that Judaism and Zionism must mean the same thing, that an attack against Israel is necessarily an attack against Jews. The false equivocation of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism is the ideological foundation of Zionism as it exists today, which is something that Natalie seems to fail to recognize. She labels those who make this conflation as disingenuous right-wing ghouls, as if it's only a niche subset of Zionists who engage in this rhetoric, as if it's not foundational to the ideology itself, as if nearly every single American politician, Republican or Democrat, hasn't been repeating the notion ad nauseum for the last 2 years. No, I don't think that this conflation is simply a byproduct of careless discourse. I think it is Zionist strategy working as intended. When Israel commits atrocities in Gaza, they position themselves to be internationally despised, not because they're blind or indifferent to the backlash, but because they can use that backlash to fearmonger, to legitimize their exploitation of real Jewish trauma, and to continue their cycle of violence and subjugation. And if I'm being brutally honest here, rhetoric like this post from Natalie are a part of this cycle. They are a part of the defense that Israel and Zionists expect liberals to run for them. And because they are unwilling or unable to criticize the underlying ideology, whether out of fear or out of ignorance, liberals do it, free of charge. Does this mean that Israel should not be criticized and sanctioned? Absolutely not. But it's something I don't want to risk contributing to if not outweighed by tangible benefits. So I approach the issue cautiously. So what I think that she's saying here is that her more distanced and less vocal approach to the issue of Israel-Palestine is one that she makes out of caution, out of fear of fanning the flames of anti-Semitism and the fear that Jewish people experience day to day. And in a brief moment of charity and what is shaping up to be a pretty combative video, I will say I kind of get this. Anti-Semitism is extremely real and is more of a threat now than it has been in the recent past. And I agree. I also don't think that Jews are hysterical or hallucinating when they are afraid or concerned for the future. But as people who post their thoughts publicly and who have at least some people who take them seriously, it's kind of our responsibility to make sure that when we think we're being cautious on behalf of one group, we aren't also causing undue harm to another. That when we're staying quiet to protect one group, that we aren't also taking away a powerful voice from a group that could really use it. Now, does that mean that you have to make a video about Palestine? That you are now morally obligated to pour milk over Netanyahu's polyethylene body? No, I don't think you have to make a video about it. But a tweet would have been nice, or really anything that clarified and codified your position on the situation, because that's really what this is about, right? It's less so the argument of if you have a platform, you must use it to condemn the genocide in Gaza in a video no less than 3 hours long, and more so just a desire for a show of solidarity? Any clear and concise indication that you are with us, you know, as one of the most prominent leftish YouTubers? And I promise you, by the way, if you had at some point tweeted something like, fuck Israel, fuck Netanyahu, they're doing a genocide, free Palestine, or something or other, nobody would be really as mad at you as they are now. I mean, I know I would be satisfied by that. And if they were mad, you are legally allowed to ignore people on the internet. Trust me, I've done it a few times. So while I do understand being cautious around issues like these, I mean, they're incredibly complex and hard to talk about, sometimes not saying anything says just as much and is potentially just as harmful as saying something. 4. Bitterness. Much of the online left spent all of 2024 single-mindedly focused on Palestine and the complicity of democratic politicians in sending aid to Israel. This campaign had the following effects. 1. 0 Palestinian lives were saved. Not one fewer bomb or bullet was fired by the IDF. 2. It may have slightly contributed to the re-election of Trump, guaranteeing that the U.S. will put no diplomatic pressure on Netanyahu for at least 4 years, and making protests against Israel both much riskier and less effective. Trump is also, incidentally, a menace to me and basically everyone I care about. A perfectly enlightened being would feel no bitterness about this, but I do. This is the worst section of the entire post for me, I think. Not just because we are nearing the end of this thing and my patience is being slowly worn down, but I also think the argument she makes here is frankly disqualifying of any claim that she might have to the term progressive. First off, I don't understand this framing. She frames the intense focus on Palestine by the online left during an election year as some sort of political blunder, a mistake that, if executed differently, might have yielded different results. There is the implicit suggestion here that the left was foolish and short-sighted in their advocacy, that they quite possibly cost us the election, and without any, as she puts it, tangible benefits. But the problem I have is that just because a Democrat, who is incidentally also a Zionist, lost an election doesn't mean there have been no tangible benefits to the activism we've been seeing since October 7th. I mean, for the first time ever, a majority of Americans have a negative view of Israel. That is huge. And according to some polling, support for Israel is at just 12% among Democrats. These are massive, massive gains that weren't even thought possible on October 8th. And so I ask you, if these people had watered down their messaging, if they had been more careful, if they had conceded their positions out of fear, like you implicitly suggest they should, do you really think that those numbers would be where they are right now? And that's what really stings about Natalie bringing up the election as well. She chooses to criticize the activists who hold the majority opinion over the feckless politicians who refused to acquiesce to that majority opinion. In 2024, activists had a goal. And in 2024, the majority of Democratic voters were aligned with that goal. And instead of pointing the finger at the politician who turned her back on her own constituency, Natalie points the finger at those activists. Instead of holding accountable the people that turn a blind eye to suffering in order to further their own political careers, she expresses bitterness at those who want to end that suffering and who call out the people who are ignoring it. She chastises those who fight for the future because they aren't pragmatic or meticulous enough, while failing to realize that this argument could be said, and has been said, for every single progressive movement in history. During the New Deal, they said that labor strikes were a danger to the economy and a political risk. Now FDR is glorified as a 20th century hero. Before the Civil Rights Act, they said that the March on Washington would alienate moderates and ruin chances for transformative legislation. Now every child in America learns the I Have a Dream speech. Even the very bricks that were thrown at Stonewall, the ones that are now a symbol of queer resistance and perseverance, were once decried as an extreme tactic that took legitimacy away from the queer liberation movement. At every turn throughout history, progressives have been told to dilute their convictions until they appear acceptable, more palatable to the powers that be. That maybe the best advocacy is one that makes compromises, doesn't get too loud, and lets the safe choice win. That perhaps the most moral thing that a person can do is compromise their morals. And to this, I, along with anyone truly dedicated to a cause, say no. That is not true. Change is by definition meant to be unpalatable, or it wouldn't be real change. Society can only move forward by daring to venture forth into places that some might feel uncomfortable or frightening, or even downright shitty at times. But what is not possible is staying exactly where you are and expecting the world to march behind you. None of this is the fault of the Palestinians, of course, who are overwhelmingly the victims here. I hope that someday American policy will shift in their favor, and I will continue to support that cause. TLDR, I see the situation as bleak, intractable, extremely divisive, and devoid of any element that could be appropriately transformed into political entertainment. That's why I haven't made a video about it. Hopefully it goes without saying that these are just my thoughts. I'm sure other breadtubers have different opinions. So I think at the core of this post, fundamentally, is the argument that we shouldn't be as ardent about certain issues as some of the online left is, that we should temper our activism to appease those who oppose our cause, and that at the end of the day, a better world just might not be possible. And as a leftist, a pro-Palestinian, and a dedicated ContraPoints fan, I have zero sympathy whatsoever for this outlook, and I think it's beneath the person who holds it. The main problem with this post, to me, is that although it's titled Thoughts on Israel-Palestine, I don't think that's really what this is, right? I don't think this is a keen analysis of geopolitics, and to be honest, I don't even think it's an earnest philosophical conversation about the ethics of activism. I think truly what this post is an attempt to use the issue of Israel-Palestine as a proxy to express her anger and bitterness toward the online left, who she feels somewhat scorned by. This is why the post comes across as her centering herself instead of the Palestinians, why it's framed like a political analysis while saying nothing of substance on the issue. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about Israel or Gaza or activism or the election, but rather a thinly veiled grudge that seeps out into her politics, where bitterness, fear, and anger take the place of compassion, bravery, and empathy. And look, on some level, I understand the bitterness and the fear and the anger. I also feel those things. I can't help but feel betrayed when I think about where we are in this political moment. But the betrayal that I feel isn't towards those that are fighting for justice. It isn't towards people demanding more from their political figures and doing activism in the streets and on college campuses. It's towards those who turned their backs on those people when they didn't have to. It's towards a Democratic president who sided with right-wingers in his condemnations of pro-Palestinian protests, who secretly collaborated with Netanyahu and lied to the public about it. It's towards a nominee who ignored the plurality of her voters because she'd rather a fascist win than speak up about Gaza. And it's toward every insincere, bad-faith actor that claims that advocacy isn't worth doing unless you know beforehand it's likely to work. Everything has a cost. Civil rights, women's suffrage, trans liberation, they all carry risks and might sometimes even cost us something critical. But the real cost would be giving up on the cause because we're too scared to lose what we already have. The real cost is resignedly accepting the atrocities of the status quo because it's easier than taking a risk. You know, I think it's quite fitting that she ends with the phrase, "I hope that someday American policy will shift in their favor," because it shows how she views change as a concept. In her eyes, change doesn't happen as a consequence of constant outside pressure on politicians or setting examples through protest or even through more radical forms of activism. To her, change is an inevitability, a ceaseless flow to the left that occurs naturally over time, a ubiquitous force that is innate to the universe. But that's not true, is it? Policy doesn't just magically shift. You don't wake up one day and suddenly Palestinians are liberated. It takes work, it takes risk, and in some cases it may take sacrifice. And I think the reason she says she hopes that someday policy shifts is because I think hope is all that she has to go on. If you scold protesters and activists for putting in the work, if you spend more time criticizing leftists than you do obstructionist politicians and talking heads, then literally all you can do is sit around and hope that one day things get better. You resign yourself to accepting despair and fear. You give up. So yeah, I'm pretty disappointed by this post, to be honest. I think it's extremely ill-advised, poorly conceived, and I hope that she grows out of thinking like this, especially as one of the most well-known voices on the online left. And I also don't think that that is entirely impossible, or even unlikely either. Like I said, I've been a ContraPoints fan for many years now, and I still think very highly of her and her content. In fact, her content is a large part of the reason that I started my own channel, and I still recommend that everybody watch her videos if you haven't already. But I simply can't unread this post, and it does change how I view her, honestly. The chastising and heavy scrutiny that she imposes against activists and the left, but not against the clearly oppositional establishment, is confusing, and I think fundamentally anti-progress. Her refusal to critically analyze the role of Zionist ideology in the atrocities in Gaza is indicative of, at best, a severe blind spot, and at worst, an explicit bias. And I don't say these things to dogpile or join a chorus of anger, but because this is what I would want someone to say to me if I had, let's be real, a kind of shitty take.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you liked it. I'm not really sure if this video will be monetized or if anyone will really even watch it for that matter, but I'm going to be donating whatever this video earns in ad revenue to the Occupied Palestinian Territory Humanitarian Fund. It just feels a little bit weird profiting from this topic, but I also think that we can turn this situation into something good. So that's where all of the profit from this video is going to go, insofar as it makes any. If you feel like contributing as well, I will leave the link to donate in the description of this video. Give what you can. But anyway, yeah, I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope you gained something from it. I know I did. And yeah, don't be too mean to good, honest people on the internet. Sometimes they just need to be nudged in the right direction, I think. But yeah, with that said, thank you so much for watching. Bye.